To the newspaper headlines, that plane story happened overnight, and the only paper who's really been able to go to town on it is the Sunday Telegraph. Were terrorists behind plane tragedy in sea, it asks, and the truth is it's probably too early to tell that, whether that's true or not. The Observer has gone with the Co-op story you've just been hearing about. The Sunday Times has a front page splash, says secret BBC report scrapped the licence fee, while this morning the BBC says that is not the case. Scotland on Sunday there. Scotland throw it away, but that's referring to the rugby, not the referendum. Now, to join me as promised, Wilf, Joan and Gavin. Wilf, must be a little strange for you after all this time sitting here doing the papers where your father once sat. I wonder whether the papers dominated your childhood as a result, the weekend papers particularly.
Well, they did indeed, and he adored the papers. It was a great hobby of his to pore over them on all weekend, but that was a battle for us as kids, was to get
him away from them.
Get him away from them, exactly. And he had this wonderful oak desk where he would have them all spread out, and we would sneak in and perhaps hide underneath it, ready to jump out at him. And I remember one particular occasion when, just as we were about to jump out, he took a phone call and it was, "Mr. President!" And we thought, Christ, we'd better stay sat tight for a little longer than we perhaps otherwise expected.
Fantastic. Well, Gavin, these are papers that David Frost would have enjoyed hugely.
He would have done,
An
yeah.
enormous amount of coverage of the Ukraine crisis. Take us through what's the best of it.
Well, I think there are three papers that really caught my eye, the Sunday Times, the Observer and the Mail. My favourite headline on Ukraine is this big headline in the Sunday Times: what would the West fight for? And I think really that is the question of the week, because after all the diplomacy that was going on in Brussels and in Paris, I was actually in Kiev, and people said afterwards, is that it? When they heard that visa negotiations were going to be frozen between the EU and Moscow. And what this paper raises is the real question is, how much do we really think is at stake, and what are we prepared to do about it? And what I also like is when they look at Germany, they point out the economic costs of all of this, in the sense that over 6,000 German companies do business in Moscow. They're dependent on Russia's natural gas. I think 35% of their gas comes from there.
All the big German car companies now have big manufacturing plants in Russia, for instance, I think.
They do, and I think it's not in the end just Germany. One of the interesting quotes, which I saw during the week but re-emerges in the Observer in their editorial today, is what about the City of London? And they quote Benjuda saying, "Britain is ready to protect the City of London's hold on dirty Russian money and forget about the Ukraine." Now, you may not necessarily agree with that, but certainly on the streets of Kiev, there is the sense that they might be abandoned, that in the end it might just be that Crimea has already slipped beyond getting it back.
I think the most important new piece of news broke too late to make the newspapers this morning, but it was in the headlines, that Kerry has said to Lavrov, if it goes on like this, we will close down the diplomatic space. Now, diplomacy is what we need more of. We need more and more diplomacy, stretching as far as it need go until there's a resolution. What we don't want are, to blackmail people into taking action. We want people to keep on talking. We're celebrating the start of we're commemorating the start of World War I. They should have kept on talking.
Keep the sabres in their scabbards, is what you're saying.
Of course, the piece in the Times does have a side point of 10 ways to punish Putin. The bottom one saying send in troops, and the quote saying Ukrainians can dream, but this is not going to happen. And I think the most likely effective punishment is a long-term one, not a short-term one, and that is to damage Russia's exports of natural gas. And I think this is only going to speed up Europe's attempts to...
But that requires European politicians brave enough to say to their electorates the gas may run out, and certainly it's going to be a lot more expensive. It's a hard choice they'd have to take.
It is a hard choice, and it's not something that can happen quickly in the short term, but with US gas exports increasing in years ahead, it is something Russia might regret.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what we all have to face is, in terms of world geopolitics, is the move of the Crimea into the Russian world of global to the brink significance? And I think we all need to ask that. I don't know the answer.
Now, the other huge story, of course, this morning is the downing of this aircraft. Gavin, you've covered a very similar case. The 777 is one of the world's safest airliners, however, isn't it?
It is. I mean, when a plane disappears and there is no communication, usually it's regarded as a catastrophic incident. And of course, most people will think that it was probably a bomb on board. But I, some years ago, covered the fall of TWA 800, a plane taking off from, I think it was JFK. And later, although this was disputed, but their conclusion was it was what they call a fuel-air explosion. So even though I'm sure they will be looking at terrorism, there sometimes can be catastrophic events. I mean, they're extremely rare, which are other than terrorism. Because,
Wilf, you've chosen the Sunday Telegraph, which has done the best job, really, on this story so far.
Indeed, and I mean, it's got an open question there, were terrorists behind the plane tragedy scene? Of course, we don't know that yet. But I suppose the amazing thing, I think, that strikes me is that two men, whether they were involved or not, were travelling on stolen passports, one of which was reported stolen 2 years ago. And I do find it amazing that
they were able to get on.
They were able to get on board the plane.
Absolutely. And, of course, China has its own separatist, Islamist problem with the Uyghur people. So...
Indeed. I mean, it's hard to know, though, if that was anything to do with it at this stage. And I suppose the overriding thought is one of deep sympathy with all the families involved.
Well, on a similarly sober note, Joan, let's turn to the first domestic
a totally different story.
Which is...
Ministers clear the path for assisted suicide to be legal. MPs are to get a free vote on a bill that is coming up in the autumn from the House of Lords Private Members Bill. And it looks as though the law is shifting so that people will not be prosecuted and there will be more tolerance. They'll be given a free vote on a bill that will enable doctors to help terminally ill people. Now, the regulations issued 3 or 4 years ago by Keir Starmer made it unlikely that family and close friends would be prosecuted for helping assisted suicide, but it left the medical profession rather unsure of whether they would be prosecuted, and they need the protection so that they can help people who are dying anyway. They're being killed by a disease, but the pain becomes intolerable, and they want the right to
You're
alleviate.
obviously very interested in this issue, Joan. Do you know how often this is happening around the country? Is there any idea of how many people are doing this?
No, well, I think there were...
The occasional case will hit the
I think
headlines.
about 40 cases have been referred since the Keir Starmer ruling, and I think 2 people might have been prosecuted, clearly, who were not sympathetic people. As far as I know, people have stopped going to Switzerland, which is just an enormous imposition on people who've got enough problems anyway. But I think that the polls that are constantly being taken are showing that public opinion is now moving very, very strongly in support of a change to the law which allows compassion and tenderness and real medical concern to take priority over sort of absolute ruling.
Gavin, your next story.
My eye was drawn to something which I'm sure will come up again as we close in on the election, and it's executive pay and what the head of the Co-op Bank is now receiving at a time when they're letting go a significant number of people. And I was looking at a comment column by Will Hutton, and he makes this charge. The evidence suggests that performance, productivity and innovation across British business are touching new lows. I'm certain a lot of people will remember the Cooperative Bank, and I think they will again wonder why it is that executives need to get paid these huge sums of money.
It's this strange thing. The profits go down, the bonuses go up.
Executive pay goes up.
It's very strange because what they always say when you attack this is, yes, but we must have the top people. And the top people demand the equivalent of pay of other chief executives.
So why are the top people not?
Why don't they lower all the standards of pay so that they would all have comparatively the same at a much lower and more logical level?
OK, let's move on to the Paralympics. Another great big story this week.
A very, very positive story that Jade Etherington has won Britain's first ever Paralympic gold medal on the snow, and she and her guide, Caroline Powell, will be receiving a silver medal in a few days' time. Congratulations to the pair of them.
It's great fun to watch the Paralympics, actually, on the snow, because it's as fast, or it seems to my eyes, as fast and dangerous as any other kind of snow Olympics.
Absolutely, and particularly this event with the limited sight skiing downhill, where it is a pair of them, the team, Jade Etherington and her guide going down together. Very exciting.
Yes. OK, to another great big current scandal, Scotland Yard.
Well, I'm really shocked, and I think we should all be. This is the week of the Lawrence story revisited and a new commitment to another inquiry because of police secrecy infiltrating the Lawrence family. The Scotland Yard are still up to it here. The Yard are in a new undercover police row. Now, this is an attempt to stop the legal bid by the women who were seduced by undercover agents, some of them having children. And they were making a bid to prosecute, and that is being fought by Scotland Yard to stop it happening. And indeed, the former Director of Prosecutions, Lord MacDonald, accused the police of engendering a culture of deceit. This is a new cover-up story. Do they never learn? Do they never realise?
On it goes.
On it goes, yeah. It's pretty grim stuff. Gavin, your next story.
Well, usually when I'm not in Kiev and such places as that, I spend a lot of time in Brussels as Europe editor. So I was drawn to The Express this morning, who have this headline: "The EU could dig up your garden." And they say, under new rules, authorities will have the power to come into people's homes and destroy plants, including popular shrubs and Virginia creeper and Hottentot fig, which I'm not immediately familiar with. But these invasive species, they have decided need sorting out. And it's something that I've so far have missed in Brussels, but obviously I need to have a look at this.
We had Barroso in the studio not that long ago.
We could have asked him about it.
He could have done with a bit of gardening therapy. But
we can come around to my garden.
We used to have the gnomes of Zurich. We were garden gnomes coming over from Brussels.
Zurich, exactly. Garden gnomes of Brussels. Wilf, your next story.
Yeah, I was going to touch on the closure of BBC3, not the closure, the move of it to the internet, to iPlayer, and I think everyone's touched on the fact that this is a great shame. It's been the breeding ground for new talent and new shows, but I think it's a sensible move, and as Peter Preston here says in the Observer, conventional television is caught on the cusp of change, and people my age and younger, of course, watch much less television live these days, and I think this is a sensible move.
What were your father's reflections on the changing world of television? Because he moved to Al Jazeera towards the end, and everything was moving very, very fast.
He did, and it's interesting. I mean, I suppose he was. Modern technology, I have to say, wasn't his forte, and he was. I always think it's funny. He was a pioneer in the world of television for 50 years, but he couldn't actually really manage to turn on a television set himself. And Sundays, if we weren't at home with him, the Sunday afternoon, you could be sure to get a telephone call asking how to navigate his way to Sky Sports 1, and childlike instructions would have to follow from our end.
Sounds very familiar indeed. I'm glad it happened in the Frost household too. Joan, have you got any more stories to regale us before we finish?
Well, a really silly Sunday morning story. This is a picture story, and the point is the photograph. A photograph of someone who's won an Oscar, a woman who's won an Oscar. This is Kate Blanchett, and it's kind of, are they like on the morning after? Well, she is sitting up in bed, perfectly coiffed, fully made up, her beautiful gown lying at the foot of the bed, her glasses, her high-heel shoes negligently on the floor. It's such a setup, and it's so hilarious. A day in the life of a star.
Where is the Oscar?
The Oscar is by the bedside with a cup of coffee and a copy of the newspaper too. I think it's hilarious. How much to enjoy.
Champagne out of sight.
That's right.
Yes, that's right.
Frosty never got an Oscar, but he's getting this great ceremony on Thursday, which you've been working on. Tell us a little bit about it.
Indeed, and I mean it's a wonderful honour that the Dean of Westminster has bestowed on him for us to have the service at Westminster Abbey.
Is that in whose gift it is, the Dean?
It is. It's. I think it's totally down to the Dean of the day, and I think he felt that Dad had been in people's living rooms for the last 50 years and done it with such charm and warmth that this was an honour that he deserved. And you know, we're really looking forward to it. It's very much a celebration of his life, and to have it there and with 1,500 people, I think the only shame is that he won't be there himself, because he would have absolutely adored it.
He'd have loved it. He would have absolutely loved it. Well, I'm looking forward to it too. Thank you very much all for coming on to do the papers. It's over to the weather now. It's going to be warmer than the Greek islands here this weekend, apparently, and it was balmy when I came in. A sunny start to spring, but will it last? Over to Nina Ridge in the weather studio. Nina.